Hello and welcome to the Pack of 7 Australia YouTube channel. If you have clicked on this video, I assume you're here for one of three reasons. The first, you're interested in governance. The second, you were suggested this video somehow. And the third, you're stuck trying to organize governance for your organization. If you are here for one of those three reasons, I suggest you stick around. You're going to find out how you can implement digital guardrails for your organization and help control your Power Platform to ensure your developers are doing what they're meant to be doing. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Holly Bretherton. I'm the State Manager of the ACS Queensland branch, and it's great to be welcoming over 80 tech professionals who are joining us from across the country today. We have everybody from student members in attendance up to CIOs and tech educators, so extending a very warm welcome to our audience. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting across the country today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. A sincere thanks to Ryan Wilson from Pack of 7, who's just joined us on screen now, and we look forward to hearing from Ryan very shortly. But just before we get started, I'll pop through some basic housekeeping points to get us started. So to avoid any distractions and noise during the presentation, we have turned off all of the guest cameras and the audio is also muted by us. You can ask a question by using the Q&A box at the top of your screen. We will keep the questions to the end of the masterclass and ask that you do keep those brief and relevant to your topic. If you don't look to have the Q&A option, you can text your questions through to Caitlin Holtgren on 0477 994 852. So today's event will provide you with 2 CPD points, but to receive those points, you must stay for the duration of the webinar. And just to note that the webinar is time recorded. We'll aim to process those points within 2 weeks of the event being held. But if you have any concerns around your points, just pop an email through to acs.qld@acs.org.au. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Ryan Wilson. Ryan is head of the development team for Microsoft 365 and Azure at Pack of 7. Under his leadership over the last 3 years, his team have become a powerful entity at Pack of 7 with broad experience and extensive knowledge of Microsoft's collaboration and productivity platform. Ryan is managing Pack of 7's most important key accounts and is well known for his hands-on style in webinars and presentations around the country. His specialisation and passion is Azure security and Power Platform governance. And without further ado, over to you, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Holly. Welcome everyone to this presentation on Microsoft Power Platform governance and control. While I share my screen. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Right, fantastic. So welcome. Now, all of you who are here, I'm sure you have had troubles in the past with Power Platform. As we all know, it can get out of control very quickly, especially if you don't have any guardrails or governance practices set up before users start to develop and grow their platform organically. So who am I? I'm the co-director and lead solution architect here at Pack of 7 Australia. And we provide governance consultation and custom business solutions as well. So what does that mean? In terms of governance consultation, we essentially help organizations mature their platform, so Microsoft 365, Power Platform and Power BI as well. It's a little bit separate by helping them strategize their maturity so that they can grow and adapt over time to reach their vision. Let's say they have a vision in 5 years to be at level 500 within the maturity levels. Yeah, and we'll help them get there and help them implement these business processes around that. Our custom business solutions. This can go anywhere from Power Platform applications all the way to custom web applications as well. We vary depending on the customer requirements, obviously. And we pick solutions that are and technologies that are suited to your business and organization. If you talk to me outside of working hours, I'm usually doing the exact same thing. So I'm in this whole area. If you're in the IT industry, you'll know it's constantly changing. So you always have to learn and adapt. And if I didn't love it, then I wouldn't be doing it. So that's why I'm here. And then I'm also interested in woodworking and motorbikes. So if you're also interested in them, always keen to have a conversation. So the agenda for today, I'm going to go through an introduction about governance, what it is, how it's currently implemented or has been implemented in the past. And then I'll relate that to Power Platform governance as well, and how Power Platform is governed with Microsoft's tools and their best practices as well. From that, I'll go into an overview of the Power Platform. Now, many of you who are here, I assume you have some background knowledge. However, trying to govern the platform is like trying to land an airplane. If you haven't been trained and you don't understand how a plane works, then you're going to have a bad time trying to land the plane. Otherwise, if you have all of the knowledge and understanding of how it works, then you're going to have a much better time implementing these governance steps and best practices. I'll then step into the adoption best practices provided by Microsoft. So there's 4 levels or 4 categories, I should say. Strategy and vision, admin and governance. Then you nurture and educate, and then support the platform as it grows as well. From there, I'm going to step into the adoption maturity model. What it is, this is what I was talking about before. We help organizations grow their maturity within the platform. So you get to understand what the maturity model is and why it's important. And then I'm going to step into the Center of Excellence Data Kit as well, the SharePoint Knowledge Hub as a communication platform, and then other tools and next steps as well. So introduction to governance. So if you've been in the IT industry, you would know that IT are always saying no, and the business side are always saying yes. And that is a constant fight, and it has been for the last decade or, well, I'd say multiple decades. However, with the Power Platform, this governance strategy is starting to change. And it is because Microsoft intentionally made the platform so that business users can pick it up and start to create things. And IT can't prevent that technically as well. So with the Power Platform and how governance is changing, we need to try and find a mixture between IT saying no and the business side always saying yes. And we can do that by implementing digital guardrails and business processes around the Power Platform so that users are using the best practices and aligning what they're doing with your strategy within the platform. Now, from all the clients I've spoken to, there are many issues that they have, or many concerns, I should say. But the top 3 are data loss of business critical or important data. So what that means is, say they have critical information in SharePoint, and they don't want that information to leave the SharePoint site. With the Power Platform out of the box, it is possible to take that data and put it into a SaaS application using an automated system. And that is concerning for IT. Surprising licensing constraints. Many of you would have come across this in the past, where you have a solution goes to be deployed, and then you find out that it requires premium licensing to connect to the Dataverse from a Canvas app, for example. And the third one, they don't have any control over the continuously growing amount or growing adoption of the platform and the amount of apps that are being created by the business side. So we want to try and implement these digital guardrails to solve all of these issues that IT typically have concerns with. So Power Platform governance, how do we implement it? And Power Platform governance is one of those things that you're going to need to adapt over time. It's not a one-stop shop. You won't be able to implement it and then move on and go to the next product. It's a continually changing platform. So with Microsoft's adoption best practices, what you can do is, if you follow them, and that is what this presentation is going to be all about, you'll be able to govern the platform with these guardrails and ensure that as the platform grows and as new features are added, your platform is secure. So what is the Microsoft adoption best practices? Essentially, it's a collection of documentation, tools, and best practices so that you can help you make informed decisions. And it establishes these digital guardrails that I was just talking about. Now, there are 4 main components: strategy and vision. So this is where you visualize where you want the platform to be in 5 years, whether you want this platform to fill the gaps in all your processes or your enterprise applications. And then you want to come up with a strategy to implement this vision. From there, you have your admin and governance. So this is where you implement your guardrails, you implement your strategy to lock down the system. And then you can nurture and educate your users. So this could be app in a day events, so your training events. You could have regular posts from champion makers within your organization or qualified makers. And this is where you start to create this community so that you can grow organically from within your organization, rather than having to outsource a lot of this development to experts per se. And then finally, you want to support this adoption. So help users communicate, implement a strategy for how you can upskill users as well, so that they have the knowledge, and the business side can have a process and know what the Power Platform can do to help this process and automate this process as well. So essentially, there are 7 core steps. The first being establish a center of excellence. Now, this is the very first step in Microsoft's adoption best practices. I'll be going into that very shortly. You then install the Center of Excellence starter kit. This is a starting point to monitor your platform. You then design and implement your business processes. So a user wants to apply for a new environment or apply for an app that might require an ALM scenario. You want to implement these processes so you can automate the uptake of this application. You then review current processes and the platform's adoption. So how many users are using it? Is it growing in adoption? And how you can improve that as well. Then you want to onboard your makers. So these are users who are, or your top Power Platform citizen developers. So the users that are making all of these business process applications, automating your organization's processes and filling the gaps. And you want to try and promote these users as well. So put them in their own environment so they have more ability to do things, because they're trained, or they have some level of expertise where they're allowed to have a little bit more functionality within the platform. And then you want to look at extending the Center of Excellence starter kit. So out of the box, it doesn't support Power BI, for example. So you can look to create a solution that pulls data from Power BI and implement and integrate that into your Center of Excellence starter kit, so you can have an overview over that. And then finally, you repeat, and you repeat forever until your processes align with your strategy, and then you'll find your organization grows, and then you'll need to readapt these processes as well over time. So you typically repeat this by having monthly meetings with your Center of Excellence, and you discuss areas which you can improve and things you need to implement to help grow the platform organically as well. So I'm giving you a little bit of a technical warning. I've done this presentation a few times at conferences, for example, and I do get some reviews that say it is a little bit too technical. As I said at the start, trying to govern the platform without knowledge is trying to land an airplane. You are going to have a bad time if you don't understand it. So that's why I have this section in here, but I just want to give you a heads up. Help and resources. So these are some handy tools. So we have the Power Apps admin white paper. This is essentially what I'm doing now, giving you some background information over the Power Platform, creating environments, for example, and so on. Then you have your Power Platform adoption best practices documentation. If you want to give that a read, I highly recommend it. It'll help you understand the platform and what Microsoft are trying to do. And then finally, you have your Power Platform adoption website. So this website gives you resources, such as it does link to the adoption best practices. It gives you a PowerPoint as well, so you can present to your C-level executives to try and strategize and plan your adoption. So the Power Platform overview. Now, the 5 core platforms within the Power Platform. Obviously, you have Power BI. This is typically the most used application or tool that I see being used by organizations. Whenever we talk about the Power Platform, people are usually saying, yes, I know Power BI. We say, oh, yeah, do you know Power Apps? And they say, no, I've got no idea what Power Apps is. So Power BI is typically the most well-known. And essentially, it's just used for reporting. So reporting back to your superior officers or C-level executives and reporting on your business data. Power Apps, this is where you can automate your business processes. So you can create applications to fill the gaps between your enterprise applications. So any flow that you have kind of using Excel, for example, or we were talking to a client the other day where they were talking about how they're still using paper processes for some of their internal data flows. And this is where Power Apps can be a great tool to automate all of this. Power Automate. This integrates very well with Power Apps. So, for example, you have an application where you have a to-do list, you submit a to-do list. Power Automate can then automate an email or add this item to SharePoint and so on. So you can automate the processes around your app using Power Automate. A gold nugget that we've been focusing on lately is the Power Automate Desktop RPA functionality. So recently for a client, we just implemented a RPA solution for their account separation and offboarding process. Essentially what it's doing is it's simulating a user clicking the buttons, and it can automate your legacy applications. So that's typically where organizations are struggling or that they have big gaps in their processes. And this tool can automate this gap and can click the buttons, click the web applications as well. So if you haven't had a look at it and don't know what it is, I highly recommend do a little bit of research on that. Finally, Power Pages, previously called Power Apps Sites or something along those lines. I forget, it's too long ago. But essentially, that's how you create your customer or web facing solutions. So it's essentially like a website builder. And you can integrate your Power Pages with Dataverse as well, which is built into Power Apps. Finally, your Power Virtual Agents. This is where you create your AI bots, your chatbots, so you can automate the communication between business users having technical issues and talking to IT and so on. So Power Platform infrastructure. Now, environments, I would say, is one of the most important areas within the Power Platform governance topic. Most of your digital guardrails will be based around Power Platform environments. So what are they? They are tied to a geographical location, so Australia, US, and so on, and can be used for different purposes. So a production environment is typically what you're going to be using the most for your department environments. For the Center of Excellence starter kit, you will create a production environment for that. However, if you have an application which requires an ALM scenario. So dev, test, production. Then you can use a different type of environment for that as well. Out of the box, it can be created by any Power Apps or Power Automate user. Now, that's one of the first things you need to do if you haven't done already. I assume most of you, if not all, will already have this implemented, where this is locked down. But yeah, I highly recommend you do that straight away. And it can be secured to a predefined security role. So I'll be demoing this very shortly. And then DLP policies, so these are your digital guardrails around connectors, can be applied to one or more environments as well. Now, an environment doesn't necessarily have to have a Dataverse instance, so it can have 1 or 0 Dataverse instances. Types of environments. Now, the two most common that you will find and that you will be dealing with are production and sandbox. Production is going to be used for most of your use cases, shared business units, production environments for your applications, and so on. Sandbox is typically used for your development and testing environments, and it can be rolled back with a sandbox environment. So if somebody does something incorrectly, you can roll back to a previous version of that sandbox environment. There are 3 other environments, trial environments. So if a user is able to create a trial within the Power Platform, that will create their own trial environment, same as the developer environment. Most of you won't have developer environments, but there are some cases where organizations tend to have this. And then finally, Dataverse for Teams. So Dataverse for Teams is an environment that is created whenever you install or create an app within Teams. So that's quite important to know. So creating an environment, I'll do a little demo. We go over to Power Apps. So if you go to make.powerapps.com, here is your Power Apps, and then you can go to the gear at the top right, click on Admin Center, and this is where you can administer environments for your organization. So if I click on environments, click new, I can choose a name. Say this is a production environment. You can choose your region, Australia, for example. This is where you select your type of environment. I'm going to select production in this case. I'm also going to select that we're going to have a Dataverse instance. You can set that as no. That's up to you. Then I'm going to click next. Change your currency. So we're in Australia. So I'm going to change that to AUD. And this is where you can define your security group. And this restricts access to members who are not a part of the security group. So if somebody who wasn't a part of this security group went to Power Platform, they wouldn't be able to see this environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a security groups, security production security group. I'm going to select myself as the owner, also as a member. Create the security group. Now there is usually a small delay in waiting for the security group to arrive. Can take up to 30 seconds in my testing. So when this comes through, we can refresh. So while we wait, now if we go back or go select, sorry, not yet. So exit, wait, refresh. But in the meantime, while we wait, I'm going to use Power Platform developers. Let's just do that. Security group, developers, done. And then you click save. And what this would do is it would create an environment where only users who are in the Power Platform developers security group are able to see this environment within Power Platform. So I am on a developer account at the moment. So there is only one environment, but if I switch to my tenant, you will find these are all the I have access to if they have a security group, for example, and these are what I can see. So if you lock it down to the security group, you can't necessarily see the environment in this list. Okay, DLP policies. So DLP policies are essentially your guardrails within the Power Platform, and they can be scoped at environment or tenant level. So it is a bit technical with DLP policies. However, the most restrictive policy will take place. So, for example, if I have a policy that says I do not want to use Salesforce as a connector, and I'm going to block that connector, and I have another DLP policy that allows that connector, when they both point to the same environment, the connector will be blocked because that is a more restrictive policy. Now, your PowerShell and admin connectors can manage DLP policies. So users who can use the admin connectors are typically your Power Platform admins, but that's something to be aware of. Environment DLP policies cannot override tenant level policies, for example. And there are 3 categories. So business, non-business, and blocked. And I'll be going into that very shortly when we get further into the center of excellence. So this brings us to the core of the presentation, which is the center of excellence. What it is, what is its purpose, and what are you trying to do with the center of excellence as well. So what is it? Essentially, the center of excellence is a group of documentation, tools, and people, all with different motives and purposes to try and control and govern the Power Platform. So typically with governance in the past, it was always IT. With the center of excellence, the idea is to have a diverse range of people trying to govern the platform. So you want someone from your business side, someone from IT, someone from service desk, for example. You want to try and diversify this group, maybe even include a couple champions who are using the platform all the time. And the Center of Excellence is there to help you build digital guardrails and provide freedom for makers and governance for IT. So it's trying to find that middle ground. As I said before, typical people, essential IT, even your support and training engineers, change management, and so on. And it's going to provide you with the leadership, best practices, governance, control, support, and training. So there are 4 steps around the Center of Excellence. Firstly, you want to secure your platform. So you establish your environment strategy, you build your guardrails, and you manage your licensing. And then you start to evangelize. So you provide a space so that users can communicate, where they can learn as well and upskill business people. And you also want to install the SharePoint Knowledge Hub. You don't necessarily have to. We have had cases where organizations would prefer to use another platform, one being Notion, for example. So that's completely up to you. However, we recommend SharePoint, especially if you're using it as your intranet. Then you monitor your environment. So you would install the Center of Excellence starter kit, and you would use the tools from this starter kit to monitor how your platform is being used, what applications are being used the most, how many users they're shared with. And then you can use that information to move applications that are going to be important within your business to their own environments or environments that they should be in. For example, if a application is using data that is critical to one department and no department should be seeing this data, then you would typically want to move that out of the default environment into its own environment. And then lastly, you have nurture. This is where you onboard your new makers. You automate the processes so that they can learn. They can request new environments or requests to join an environment and so on. And then this is where you have your meetings as well. You talk to your center of excellence, determine where you're not or where you're struggling and where you can improve. So the first step, secure. You want to secure your environment. Now, this can begin with one person. You don't necessarily just need a team or need a team of 5 or 6 people. This can be one person. And this team size is going to depend on your organization size as well. So if you're a fairly small organization, one person's going to be enough. However, the bigger your organization gets, the more people you're going to want to bring in to your center of excellence. It is, I would say, pretty important to receive your executive sponsorship, so C-level executive. The reason for this is, as we've seen clients in the past who have tried to push Power Platform, they have struggled when there is no C-level attention around it. You're not going to be able to promote the platform if there's no C-level sponsorship. As I said, diversify your team and make sure you organize regular meetings with your center of excellence. Secondly, you want to establish an environment strategy. So what is an environment strategy? Essentially, it's there to help secure your data and facilitate your ALM scenarios and make sure you're organizing your environments, to put it simply, where you're not going crazy. So it is best practices to not create too many environments or too many DLP policies. So you want to make sure you have an environment strategy. You try and stick to this strategy. Now, the default environment. This is, I would say, the environment we get asked the most questions about. So users out of the box can create anything. So they can start creating apps, they can start creating flows all within this default environment. And that is Microsoft's idea, and their whole initiative behind this is to try and promote the business side to have this freedom to create these applications. There is no way to block or restrict users from creating apps. That's usually the first question we get from IT admins. No, you cannot block them. So this is where this governance approach of continually monitoring the platform is going to be very important. However, you want to try and make sure that it's only being used for your first-party integration. So what this means, typically, if you go to SharePoint, you can edit the new form for when you create an item in a SharePoint list. And when you try to edit that and create a new app, that'll create the app in the default environment. So that's more like a first-party integration. You also want your personal productivity apps in here as well. So Joe wants to automate when he receives an email, put the attachments in his OneDrive folder. That could be a personal productivity automation, and that belongs in the default environment. And most of your effort will be around maintaining this environment. Now, the power user environment. This is most likely the first environment you are going to create when you leave this presentation. A special environment for your champions or your makers who are making a lot of solutions already. And the idea of this environment is that you want to provide a little bit more freedom for these users. So in the future, you might say you have to go and get a certification from Microsoft, or you have to go to this app in a day training event, and so on. And then they might be able to use connectors such as SQL Server or Azure DevOps and stuff like that. So they can do a little bit more automation within this environment. Now, it is quite important that you document your reasoning behind it. And you also document the allowed connectors. So why someone would want to come into the power users environment. What benefits are there to being in, and so on. You also want to create a community for your power users. So this is where your top makers can communicate and talk to each other. And that's going to drive the most innovation within your organization as well. So custom environments, this is where your environment strategy comes in. So there are different cases. So firstly, on the left, you have your personal productivity, your power users environment as well. That's going to be one you create. Also your center of excellence environment. That's going to be the environment you install your center of excellence starter kit. Then you have your environment strategy. So this is where you might see departments that have X amount of employees in it. We're going to create a new environment for them. Or departments that have sensitive data. We need to create a department for them or a environment for them. Then also determine how you would create the ALM environments. So your dev, test, and production environments. What type of applications belong in those ALM scenarios as well. So here is an example environment strategy, or I would say this is a perfect starting point for a lot of organizations. There isn't really a one-stop shop environment strategy. Every organization is going to be different. However, most do start with this template and then they grow and change it how they want. So after you implement your environment strategy or you define it, the question we often get asked is, or from our clients, is where does my app belong? Or where does this app belong then? Here's a perfect table for that. So one case might be if it's being used by a lot of users. That would be where you change the environment that you put this app in. So whether it's 7 to 30 users, you might put it into a shared environment. More than 30 users, this is where you want your dedicated environment for this application. Also the nature of data, as I was talking about before. If it's highly confidential, this belongs in its own environment. If it's confidential for the department, then you can have a department shared environment as well. One tip before you go ahead and create all of these environments, start small. So don't create all of these environments now. You want to create them as the use case comes up. So try and prevent yourself from organizing your whole organization within Power Platform immediately, because when you create an environment, production environment, it does take up 1 gigabyte of your capacity, your Power Platform capacity, which I think the default is around 80 gigabytes. So and grow as your use cases arise. Okay, that was a copy. All right, next, you want to create your DLP policies. As I said, well, not as I said, but don't begin immediately. You can. However, I recommend reviewing the current connectors you're currently using in your environments. So you can do that using PowerShell. If you have someone with the expertise, they can pull all the data and see what connectors are being used. And then you can begin initiating your cleanup process. So implement your DLP policies that you would like to be there or are close to what you'd like to be there, and then go ahead and clean up your apps and improve the DLP policies and cut it down until you reach the point where you're happy with your environment and your DLP policy. You want to make sure you communicate your DLP policies. So users will ask a lot of questions as soon as you implement your DLP policies. They'll ask questions such as, I want to use this connector, how do I do that? I want to use this connector, but I can't in this environment. I don't know where to go. This is where you want to have your communication platform, such as SharePoint, that communicates your DLP policies and your DLP strategy as well. Here's an example. So you have your default policy, and that applies to all new environments, except so except this department environment or this business unit environment, except for these ALM environments and so on. Next, you create your DLP policies for your department environment so that they have the connectors that they're permitted to use, and then block the rest or move the rest into the non-business category. And you can do that for all of your environments until you're happy with each environment and what they're being used for, what connectors are allowed. For example, you might have the finance department who want their own environment, and you might allow them to use a certain connector that relates to them, and so on. So DLP policies. Let's go ahead and do this. Cancel that. Just wait for it to load. All right, I might delete that. Okay, now my developer tenant only has one environment at the moment, but I'm going to use this as a example of how you would implement your default DLP policy. So I am going to name this default policy. Click next. Now this is the area where you have your 3 categories. Now it is recommended to block all connectors that can be blocked for your default and all new environments as well. So if I go into, I can filter blockable by yes. I'm going to select all and click block. So now all of those connectors are now blocked. So if there was a application that used a connector and I submit this DLP policy, they will receive an error. They will receive an email saying your app is no longer being used or has an error. Please fix it. And they can go in and see that the connector is now being blocked. By clear all filters. Now these are all of the connectors that can't be blocked. They're all Microsoft connectors, obviously. And this is where you have your 2 categories, business and non-business. And what these 2 categories mean is if you have a connector in the business category and you have a connector in the non-business category and you create a Power App that uses both of these connectors, it's not going to work. Okay, so the idea is you want data that stays in the business category to not be able to leave to the non-business category. For example, I'm going to go ahead and move SharePoint to business, but leave Dataverse in the non-business. And that means an app or a page flow next to both of these connectors, it's not going to work. They're going to receive an error. Say using connector, I don't know the exact, something along the lines of a DLP policy does not permit this connector from being used, for example. Next, now that you're blocking all of your connectors, or all of the blockable connectors, you want to set the default group as well. So what the default group does is any new connectors that Microsoft release over time. So for example, a year ago, there was only 800 connectors. Now there's over 1,000. This default group, any new connectors will get put straight into this blocked category. So if I go ahead and change that to blocked, click apply, and then all new connectors will then move into that category as well. Custom connectors, you can add patterns to block certain custom connectors or connectors that use certain names or URLs. Click next, and this is where you define your scope. So whether you want this to apply to all environments, that would be where you, in all cases, you never want this connector to be used, no matter what. For example, you never want the Salesforce connector because your enterprise doesn't use Salesforce. So let's create a DLP policy that blocks Salesforce from all environments, no matter what. However, the default policy, you would want to exclude certain environments. So this is where this applies to all environments except those that are excluded. So if I click next, I would be able to exclude environments from this policy. For example, the default environment in this case, but you wouldn't do that in your case. And then that would be excluded from this policy, and so on. So I won't go ahead and create, but we'll jump back. Okay. Now, these are the last steps of your secure phase for your center of excellence. This typically your organization already has in place. You already have a license assignment strategy in place, but just in case you don't, you just want to make sure that you have a strategy of how you're going to implement or assign licenses within your organization. So whether you're going to do it manually, someone comes up and asks you, yes, okay, I'm going to assign you a license. Whether it's group-based or if there is an approval process using an ITSM application or along those lines. But most organizations typically already have this in place, but just in case you don't, that's something you want to establish in the secure phase. Finally, you want to create your business value measures. So how you're going to value certain or your business solutions, I should say. So you have a Power App that's created to automate a certain process. How are you going to measure this business value so that you can report on it in the future and determine how successful the Power Platform is and how much return on investment your organization is getting as well. So this could be a Microsoft form, for example, with questions, but it's something where you just want to establish a way of measuring this business value. So that's the end of the secure phase. Once you set up all of those processes and guardrails, essentially you've secured the platform. So then you want to start to evangelize and begin to grow the platform organically within your organization. This is typically done through your communication channels, Yammer or Teams, for example, and a Power Platform wiki. So that could be on SharePoint or within Teams. In the case that I'm going to showcase today, or give you a brief overview of, it's within SharePoint. And Microsoft have fantastic documentation about how to actually implement this template. I'll show you the template that they provide. Nothing has been edited. It's all out of the box, so you can see what you get, and then you can edit the rest yourselves. On this platform, you want to also communicate your training strategy. So your app in a day events, when are they going to be? How often are they going to be? What you can learn within your organization. You also want to promote your top makers. So if a developer had a question, they could go to these users, for example, rather than going through IT and ask this user, hey, do you know how to fix this issue that I'm having? One point I like to make is, I would say not that long ago, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, we all used to include Word and Excel skills on our resumes. And now that's no longer the case. Microsoft released a new platform, and users are assumed that they should just learn it, or Microsoft assumes that people are just going to learn this platform, know how it's used. And same with the organization, C-level executives, they say, okay, we have this platform, now use it. Now you don't know how to use it. So training is extremely important, and making sure you communicate as much resources as you can, so that your business or your citizen developers have the resources to be able to upskill themselves and learn what this platform is and how they can use it. The SharePoint Knowledge Hub. Okay, I go over here. So here's the SharePoint Knowledge Hub template that I've actually installed on our tenant. This is all out of the box. I haven't edited anything. This is all the content it comes with as well. So you have your success stories, champion of the week. You can add your events. So when are your app in a day events going to be? Where, for example. And then you also have Power Platform at Pack of 7 in this case, or at your organization. And this is where you communicate your environments, your DLP policies, your environment strategy as well. How you can request a premium license. So you can edit this template so that it aligns with your strategy and how you want to implement this procedure within your organization. It already has a lot of background information, especially around DLP policies and environments. And you'll just have to fill the gaps in this template. This is all provided for free by Microsoft. Here is the documentation, for example. You can quickly look this up. And it does give you a step-by-step guide on how to do it. It is using PowerShell. It is just a PowerShell script. Essentially looks like this. You change the parameters and then it will install it within your own tenant. Okay. Now for the next stage, monitor. So now you have secured your platform. You've established your communication platform as well. Now you need to begin to monitor. Monitor how it's being adopted and how it's being used, what applications are being used. So this is where you would install the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. What is it? It's essentially a collection of tools and reports to help you monitor your platform. So you can identify moved to a new environment. But it is, as the name implies, a starting point, as it is a starter kit. So you will need to extend it to fit your own requirements or fit your own questions. For example, out of the box, it doesn't cover Power BI. That is a gap in the starter kit. Although this Power Platform governance doesn't really apply to Power BI, it's slightly separate because of the way Power BI is structured. You can implement your own solution to pull data from Power BI and implement it into this starter kit as well. And then you need to constantly monitor your environment. So it's not, as I said earlier, at the start of the webinar, it's not a one-stop shop. You will need to constantly monitor and adapt your business processes to align with how it's being adopted and used within your organization. Okay. Now, this is the Center of Excellence within our tenant. I will show you some live data. So the first app and the most useful, in my opinion, is the Power Platform admin view. So if we run this, you will find that it gives you an overview over your entire Power Platform tenant. So here's the dashboard, most makers, what environments have the most apps and flows. You can drill down into the Power Apps themselves or the flows, for example. Let's have a look at this one. And then you also have all of the related information, return on investment. You can edit all of this information to add this feedback and this information so that when or as your platform grows, you have descriptions about applications, for example. That is typically a business process that is developed pretty quickly within an organization that implements the Center of Excellence. The first thing they want to do is they want to identify what apps are being used for. And this application is fantastic for that. You can send a Microsoft form to the creator of the application, get them to fill out the information, and then input it into this application. So you have all of this information in this one single app. Environments as well, what environments exist, and so on. So it is an extremely handy toolkit that comes out of the box. There are other apps as well. So a theme editor, gallery. There is also environment request applications. Some of these do require licensing or premium licensing. You can actually install the Center of Excellence starter kit in a Dataverse for Teams environment. Then you only need to have Power Automate premium licensing. and you can pin these apps to that team. However, there is a bit more limited functionality around it. To install the Center of Excellence, it is free. Microsoft provide it all for free. However, you will need an account with premium licensing to be able to run the flows to synchronize the data. So it's all documented within, where is it? I can provide the resources later, but it is all documented within Microsoft's starter kit installation guide. It will tell you what licensing you need and what applications there are as well. So their purpose, what each application is doing. Microsoft are constantly releasing updates for the Center of Excellence starter kit. They recently just updated how you can install it. So it's an automated installation process. While 6 months ago, it used to be very manual. So they are doing a lot of work around this. So that's the perfect starting point for you so that you can monitor your environments and your makers as well. So often when I get to this point in the presentation, I'm asked, what are some concrete steps I can implement? And these are the 7 steps that I like to recommend to start off. So the first thing, and the most important, restrict environment creation to admins only. This being global admins and Power Platform admins. Then rename the default environment to personal productivity, because that will communicate and relay what this environment is built for and what its purpose is. Thirdly, you want to create the Power User environment and then also document that in SharePoint or whatever you're using. Consider whether you want to review currently used connectors for apps within your organization, or whether you just want to create the DLP policies immediately. If you decide to review connectors, you could install a Center of Excellence before creating DLP policies, just to have the monitoring tools in place before you can decide on what connectors you want to block and what ones you want to move to business and non-business. However, in a lot of cases, organizations tend to create a pretty loose policy to begin with, clean up, and then adapt that default policy as they clean and move apps around. So what I recommend is then you create your DLP policies, create the Center of Excellence environment as well, and then install the Center of Excellence starter kit. So what is next after this point? So you've implemented your Center of Excellence, all of the tools, and you're starting to monitor your platform. Then you want to take a maturity assessment. So if I follow this link, Microsoft also, as they always do, document everything. So there are different criteria for each section, and you can see where your organization is at, and then you can start to strategize how you want to get to the level you want to get to. So you might say, I only want to get to level 400 in these areas. Then you can start to strategize how you get there. What business processes do you need to implement to get there as well? So then you design and implement your business processes based on this maturity assessment. Then you can review the current processes and the platform adoption as well. Similar to the slide at the start of the presentation, you then onboard new champions into the Power User environment. Make sure they have their communication channels set up where they can communicate with other champions as well. And then you want to market and promote the platform. So that's the most important thing. It's great to try and govern your platform, but if you're not trying to promote it with it internally, it's not going to grow. So make sure you're trying to promote it. Market training events, for example. Market people who are using it a lot or what they're doing with it, so that it will start to grow within the organization. To extend the Center of Excellence starter. So what processes or what monitoring functionality does it not do at the present time? The only way you're going to understand that is by installing it and then playing around with it and understanding what it's capable of. Maybe you don't like the licensing requirements with a lot of the apps, for example, and then Step 7, you repeat. And then you do the process again and again and again. Now, you might find as your organization grows that the Center of Excellence Starter Kit can't do this or that. And we don't have the functionality to do this or that. Or, for example, it might take too much expertise and knowledge to extend the Starter Kit from its base starting point. And this is where organizations typically begin to look at utilizing third-party governance solutions. These third-party governance solutions also expand outside Power Platform. There are many out there. At the conference we were just at last week, there were 3 or 4 governance solutions out there, so there's not just one. And they do cover most Microsoft services. So we partnered with Rencore so that we could fill this gap with our clients. So some clients did begin to outgrow the Starter Kit, and this is where we partnered with Rencore to develop this Rencore Governance solution. So essentially, Rencore Governance, you can start a free trial within your organization, play around with it, see what it's capable of. But essentially, it just gives you a holistic overview over your entire tenant. So you can create, or what it essentially is doing is sitting on top of your Microsoft 365 tenant, and it will scan all of your data. Okay. It will then compare this data to your compliance policies. So if I go to compliance, there are 120 compliance policies out of the box with Rencore. And you can configure these depending on your requirements or what you're trying to focus on. Maybe, for example, SharePoint sites that have one owner or less is not a extremely high violation. You might lower the violation down to a warning instead of a critical severity, stuff like that. And you can create your own compliance policies as well. From that, you can create your own dashboards and reports to report on that. So for example, if you want to focus on teams, you can create a teams dashboard. So you can view teams that have private channels. If you don't know with Teams, when you create a private channel, it does create a new SharePoint site collection rather than a sub-site within that Teams site. So that could be something you want to look at and make sure you have an overview over. From there, you can automate a lot of these processes. So if a violation occurs, what then? So you might want to send an email to a certain department, or you might want to disable a Power App, for example, and so on. So you can automate all of that. Finally, provisioning. So you can create provisioning templates if you want to allow users to create teams. For example, they can go through this approval process through this platform. And those are some tools. We partner with Rencore to fill the gap, but there are many tools out there. I highly recommend doing some research and understanding what is out there, what they're capable of. But the Center of Excellence Starter Kit will be a perfect starting point for you. And then you can begin to look at these other solutions as you grow and as the Power Platform is adopted over time. That is the end of my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed and got something out of it. If you have any questions, please send them through to my email. I will be answering all of the questions this afternoon as well, or we do have a Q&A at the end of the session today. Yeah, so thank you very much. And I'll hand it back over to Holly.
Ryan, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. It was great to step through the best practice governance principles for the Power Platform, looking at those digital guardrails for adoption, recommendations around the Centre of Excellence and monitoring and next steps, and also the help and resources that are available. So we've now got about 10 minutes, and I thought we might move now to some Q&A time. And we've had some really good questions come through online, Ryan. So I'll just go to those now. So the first question, Ryan, you mentioned creating different environments in the Power Platform. Does that enable you to extract a staff list name, for example, from a HR environment into a sales environment, for example?
Sorry, repeat the question one more time, if possible.
Certainly. So you mentioned creating different environments in Power Platform.
Mhm.
Does that enable you to extract a staff list, for example, from a HR environment or system into a sales environment, for example?
Yeah, so when moving applications or flows within environments, typically you can package the apps and flows or the Dataverse tables into a solution, export the solution, and then move it into a new environment. So what it can't do, for example, is, well, I want to say what it can't do, but if you're connecting to a SharePoint list, that SharePoint list is separate to the Power Platform. So if you have an app in a certain environment that's connecting to a SharePoint list, moving the app won't necessarily move that data. That data will still be in SharePoint, but it is used, for example, when you connect to Dataverse, the data is in the Dataverse or the app is in this certain environment. When you package those Dataverse tables in the app and move them into another environment, then that will move all of that information into that new environment. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think it did. Thank you, Ryan. Moving now to the second question. So where can we download the Knowledge Hub from? Just to recap on that.
No worries. So I have the link here. I'll pop it in the chat. So this is the documentation to install the Knowledge Hub, and also it provides a link of the download of the template as well. So I'll pop that in the chat here.
Wonderful. And we might circulate that on email to everyone after the event as well.
No worries.
Thanks, Ryan. And moving now to the final question. Can Centre of Excellence track or monitor other Microsoft platforms like Azure outside of the Power Platform?
The starter kit. So out of the box, no. However, this is where you would implement your own processes and your own customization with the starter kit it does require the expertise. For example, you could create the to pull data from the Graph API that has all of this information. For example, audit logs, the use of Power BI, and so on. You can pull all of that insert it into the Dataverse of your Center of Excellence environment. You can then customize the app, like the admin app that we were looking at earlier, and you can customize that where you can also add this new section for Azure or audit logs, for example, and you can implement all of that yourself. As I said, this is where it does get a little bit complex. You will need the knowledge, the expertise. However, I always say give it a go first. Maybe you have someone in your organization that is capable of doing all of that. But yeah, then you can begin to take a look at where you can improve. Maybe this is where you might look at a third-party app like Rencore. But yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Ryan. And actually, we've just had a lucky last question drop through here in the Q&A. So do you believe that a team that doesn't have the experience implementing governance tasks could be successful without having an expert team supporting the implementation side? And I think you've covered a bit of that already.
Yeah, I absolutely do think you can. So as like Microsoft provide a lot of documentation. If you look up Power Platform adoption best practices, it's usually the first link. You can read through that documentation. It'll provide you with the knowledge and expertise to be able to implement a lot of this stuff. It's only when you begin to get into automating the processes where this is where you might require some expertise or external help, like automating the process for an environment creation, or you have a new app, for example. This might be somewhere or something that you'd need further expertise. But I absolutely do think you can implement a lot of it yourself. Just read through the documentation, and it should guide you pretty well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ryan. We really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise with us today. And thanks to everybody for all those great questions you've popped through. So just before we wrap up today and say goodbye, I just wanted to give you a heads up on some future events that are coming up that ACS has organised. So on the 6th of September, we have the ACS online masterclass, Data Modelling Using R Programming Language. So at this event, you'll learn from expert Apurva Kamani, who will explore R programming fundamentals around data import, problem solving, visualization and regression, decision trees, and time series analysis. So ACS members can also catch up on the first fundamentals session that Apurva delivered last year in the ACS member webinar library. So don't miss out on that one. It is filling up quite quickly. A reminder that you can visit acs.org.au to search the event calendar, and that will give you a listing of all upcoming webinars that are scheduled, and additionally face-to-face events wherever you're based in the country. Once again, as we mentioned before, just allow 10 working days for your CPD points to be added to your profile. And on the very next slide, we'd just like you to take 60 seconds to complete the survey and give us your feedback on today's event. We really take this feedback seriously, and it helps us shape the future professional development program, and we can ensure that you're getting the professional development that best suits your needs and your education level. So thank you all very much for your time today. We really hope that you valued this wonderful presentation. A big thanks again to Ryan for a fantastic masterclass that he's delivered. And we're actually looking forward to taking this out on the road in Queensland through some regional locations as well. So stay tuned for some further information on that. So on that note, thank you very much to everyone. Thanks again to Ryan, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you want to learn more about RPA and how you can automate a lot of your processes within your organization, click this video here. If you want to learn more about the building blocks of SharePoint, click this video here. See you later.